What's up everybody, we're back with another raid guide and today we're taking a look at the Stormwall Blockade. So I'll be going over all the mechanics, how they work and our overall strat for this fight. Starting off, it's a two-phase fight. You start with the raid split between two boats. On each boat is a mini-boss. The mini-bosses will swap boats during phase 1, so both sides will have to fight each mini-boss. When the mini-bosses are dead, phase 2 starts. There's a raid-wide mechanic, if you will, Laminaria energy, or however it's pronounced. Several abilities generate energy to her, which is the final boss of this encounter. If she ever hits 100 energy, everyone dies. So both phase 1 and phase 2 is all about not giving her any energy or as little as possible. But let's check out phase 1 and the boat bosses. First out is Sister Catherine. Voltaic flash, series of lightning beams appears and must be dodged. These can spawn at the sides of the boat, the front, the back. There's a few different patterns that can spawn, but which one is random. Being struck by the lightning deals a very large amount of nature damage. Standing in the middle of the boats makes it a lot easier to dodge. And crackling lightning. Blue swirlies appears under a random player. Marking them after 4 seconds, it saps them with a bolt of lightning, dealing nature damage to everyone within 6 yards. It also triggers Thunderous Boom at the same location, which deals a large amount of nature damage and silences everyone within 12 yards of the impact. Damage is reduced based on range. The blue swirly follows the targeted person, so this person should just run to the edge of the boat. And Electric Shroud. The boss bubbles herself. It absorbs like 350k damage, but it also makes her immune to interrupts. She immediately starts casting Tidal Empowerment, which generates 2 energy to the boss every 3 seconds. Nuke down the shield and interrupt. There's also Jolting Volley. Basic AoE on the whole boat, deals a lot of nature damage to everyone. And swapping side we have Brother Joseph. He uses Sea Storms. Series of freezing storms target a player location. Targeted players get marked, deals frost damage to the target plus anyone inside their circle. When it expires, it leaves a sea storm at the location or a patch, deals ticking frost damage to anyone standing in it, but it also reduces movement speed by 50%. These should be dropped near the edge of the boat if possible. And Seize Temptation summons a tempting siren that would cause a random nearby player to walk to the siren. If the player reaches the siren, they jump off the ship. Also deals a bit of ticking nature damage to everyone while it's alive. Needless to say, nuke it down before one of you jumps off the ship. And Tidal Shroud. Just like Electrical Shroud, Joseph bubbles himself, absorbs 350k damage, becomes immune to interrupts, and channels Tidal Empowerment. Nuke down the shield and interrupt. And Tidal Volley. Throws bolts of water at everyone on the boat, dealing a large amount of frost damage. On top of this, they both use Translocate. The mini-bosses will teleport to the other ship. This is based off each individual mini-boss HP. When one of them reaches 50%, that mini-boss will teleport to the other ship. So if you don't bring them to 50% at the same time, you'll end up with 2 mini-bosses on one boat for a while. If one boat doesn't have a mini-boss on it, Laminaria will pound it with water bolts that deal damage if you stand in them. The boss chaincast this until there's a mini-boss on that boat. And lastly, Soul of the Tide Priest. When a mini-boss dies, its soul reappears and begins casting greater Tidal Empowerment, generating 5 energy to Laminaria every 2 seconds. When both mini-bosses are dead, the soul disappears. Because of this, it is vital to ensure that the mini-bosses die almost exactly at the same time, otherwise you'll give the boss a huge amount of energy, which is not good. So how do we deal with phase 1? Split the raid as evenly as possible by output, both healing and damage, and 1 tank per boat. Kill the mini-bosses as evenly as possible, make sure they reach 50% at the same time. The mini-bosses have different health pools, so one side will need to stop DPS pre 50% and one side will need to stop DPS post 50% to ensure they swap ship at the same time and so they die at the same time. There's no workaround here. And make sure to nuke down the bubbles and interrupt any Tidal Empowerment casts. For the brother team, stay loosely spread and drop your sea swells near the edges of the ship, but always try and leave some space to move around. As soon as a siren spawns, swap to it, nuke it down fast. The player that gets targeted by the siren needs to run away from it. You can use the sea swell pools to slow yourself as you're getting dragged to your doom. And for the sister team, try and stay stacked in the middle of the ship at all time. It makes dodging so much easier. The player that gets crackling lightning, run out as far as he or she can from the middle and wait until the debuff expires. Dance and dodge the lightning when Voltaic flash is cast, and again make sure that they die at the same time. When both mini-bosses are dead, you can click the orb on your ship and you'll get teleported to the actual boss, and phase 2 begins. In phase 2, the boss will use Sea Swell. Every player in the raid gets a swirly underneath them, and after a short moment, water bolts rain down, dealing a ton of damage, and spawns a freezing tide pool at the location of every swirly. Deals ticking frost damage to anyone standing in the pool. And Storm's Whale debuffs a player, dealing ticking nature damage for 10 seconds. When the buff ends, that player will spawn an energized storm ad at their location. While you have the debuff, you can run over the freezing tide pools and absorb them. And for the energized storm ad, immediately after spawning, it starts moving towards the boss. If they reach her, they start generating 6 energy per 2 seconds until they die. This needs to be killed before it starts generating energy for the boss. These ads can be slowed, but they can't be stunned or rooted. When they die, energized storm ads leave behind an energized remnant. The energized remnant saps the raid, dealing nature damage every 2 seconds and increases nature damage taken by 5% in this stacks. And Ire of the Deep. Water orbs appears and after a few seconds hits the ground, dealing a large amount of frost damage split between everyone hit. This ability has a visual circle to stand in. If nobody soaks it, it instead deals frost damage to everyone and spawns freezing tide pools, so do stand in this. The boss auto-attacks apply kelp wrapping, dealing ticking nature damage which increases per stack up to 5 stacks, and it also reduces movement speed by 2% per stack. You gain roughly 1 stack every 2 seconds. This debuff can also be dispelled. And when this debuff expires or is dispelled, it grants all nearby players and creatures kelp wrapping, which increases damage taken of all creatures by 10%. Creatures again being players and enemies. This effect does not target the boss, but it can be used on the storm ads. So if the tank gets dispelled next to an ad, that ad takes a lot more damage. So how do we deal with phase 2? You want to start with having 2 stack points, one for melee and one for range, and mark one range and one melee player that these groups can follow. You want each group to stay as stacked as possible, and when Sea Swell is being cast, wait for the swirlies to spawn and move out of them. Doing this will leave you with a lot more space in phase 2. Just make sure you do move out or you will be one shot when they're stacked. The player that's debuffed by Storm's Whale needs to run and clear as many tide pools as possible. These are the ones that spawns from Sea Swell. On top of this, they need to drop the ad off far back when the debuff expires. We used the Druid for this with either Tiger Dash or you got Tiger's Lust from a Monk to speed it up a bit. And when the ad spawns, have your ranged DPS start nuking it down. If you don't have a lot of ranged, melee will just need to help out as well, but it's better if range is on it. Make sure that the ad gets slowed as soon as possible. Frost mages are great at this, but if you have a Blood DK, he can use his 90% D&D slow on the ad when it spawns, and Hunter Traps can be pre-placed to slow it as soon as it spawns. When the storm ad dies, you'll need to assign someone to run over the energized remnant that it drops, which gives them the Storm's Whale debuff. If you don't do this, the damage from the raid-wide zaps will overwhelm your healers eventually. You should, however, let the remnant zap the raid a few times to increase boss DPS uptime and to stagger the ad spawns a little bit. Druids are great for this, what with Travel Form and Tiger Dash and all, but any player can do it. Later in the fight, you might need one more person assigned to picking up a remnant due to multiple ads spawning, so continue moving as a group during Sea Swell, clear pools with remnant debuff and spawn ads in the back, range kill ads, and rinse repeat. As the phase goes on, you will have multiple storm elementals to deal with. At this point, you will probably need all of your DPS to swap to the elementals and get them down fast. Watch out for Ire of the Deep, it must be soaked. 2 or 3 players per soak will be safe. Just be on the lookout, they can spawn pretty much anywhere in the phase 2 area. And tanks need to manage the kelp wrap debuff. It caps at 5 stacks, but you don't always want to swap immediately when 5 stacks is reached. Your priority is to drop the stacks or let them expire near an energized storm ad to make it take more damage. Once the boss is taunted off you, run towards the storm ads to drop a debuff on them. Coordinate with your healers to dispel the debuff off you as soon as your close enough to the Stormad. This fight is very healing intense in phase 1, but gets much less so in phase 2, where it's instead a bit of a DPS check. Kill boss before it gets full energy and kills you. We used Bloodlust in phase 2 as soon as all of our 3-minute DPS cooldown were ready. And I think that pretty much covers everything. If you have any questions at all, make sure to hit me up in the comments below. Don't forget to check out my Patreon if you'd like to support my work with the guides, and as always, if you like these kind of videos, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave me a like, and ring that notification bell and switch it to all. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.